Welcome to episode 13 of Published. I'm your host, Tanya Hall, and today I will be speaking with Howard Love, author of The Startup J-Curve.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher, to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to another episode of Published. Today we're excited to bring you another author interview, this time with Howard Love, author of The Startup J-Curve. With over 35 years as a Silicon Valley serial entrepreneur, Howard Love has founded or co-founded over 15 companies and is the current CEO of Love to Know Corp, one of the largest U.S. digital media companies. Howard speaks frequently on entrepreneurship for conferences, summits, and events in North America and overseas, so we thought he would be the perfect author to share his experiences in distributing his book and the impact the book has had on his business. So let's start the interview. So Howard, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So, Howard, you're obviously a very busy man. Why did you decide to write a book?
Great question. I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years. I've, founded and co-founded lots of companies and invested in lots of companies. And startups are hard. And, I see entrepreneurs struggling all the time. And I really just wanted to help current and future entrepreneurs out and make their journey a little easier, a little more pleasant, a little more predictable, and hopefully a lot more successful.
That's very noble of you. I'm sure you've learned lots of lessons the hard way.
Yeah, well, yes. All my lessons were learned the hard way. I'm not a good listener, so...
School of Hard Knocks and all that.
Exactly. A long school. One of my favorite sayings is the price of education goes up substantially after college.
I love that. It sounds like a bumper sticker.
I assure you that was true in my case.
Very good. So this was your first book, correct?
Yes, it was my first book, and that was part of it too. Is that to me it was kind of a personal challenge because I'd never written a book, and so I just thought it'd be really cool to do it. And of course, I had a little idea of how hard it was to do, and the various challenges. And like most startups, I vastly underestimated the difficulty, but also underestimated the reward.
So having gone through that entire process, what was your favorite part of the publishing process? I'm sure it was full of ups and downs, and going through it myself now, I can certainly relate to that. But what was your favorite part?
Well, one of the benefits that I actually did not, think of prior to writing the book was that the process of actually writing the book forces you to really think through your ideas, and it really helps clarify your thoughts and ideas. It's one thing, to be sitting around with friends and family, and you have a glass of wine, and you're sort of talking about this idea or that idea, and that's easy and fun. But boy, when you put pen to paper, you really have to have your ideas really well organized and thought through. And so that process, on the one hand, was difficult, but on the other hand, it provided a great benefit of doing that. And then the other part of the process is that I loved is just, of course, releasing the book. It's very exciting to actually have it finished and get it out there. And then, the other great part of it was the people I've met along the way.
Mm-hmm. Good. The point that you make about the writing process helping you to get very clear on not just message, but even sort of your logic, the framework, the structure, I think is a huge takeaway. And I find that even when I'm writing shorter articles like for Inc. magazine, but for a book, absolutely, it really is, it takes a certain level of discipline, to not only make sure that content is concise and is delivering the value that you want it to deliver, but that it's also, I think it's easy when you're an expert in something to sort of go off on these tangents that are relevant to some people, but you have to have this discipline to really rein it in.
You do.
Yeah.
Yes. And I've said this before, that even if I had never sold a copy of the book, it was a worthwhile exercise just for that, because it's a huge benefit. And a benefit that, frankly, I didn't really expect going in.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because it's something that I think we probably don't talk about enough, but it is I would say that is a common theme as we talk to people once they've finished the grueling process of writing the manuscript. So that's great feedback. Now, of course, we are busy plugging away at selling your book through all of our typical channels now, and this particular episode of our podcast is focused on that phase of the publishing process, which is, I always joke, our authors will date production and they'll date marketing, but they marry distribution, because that is the long-term relationship that takes them all the way through really the whole life cycle of the book once it's out to market. So what was your biggest takeaway from working with our distribution team, which for our listeners, distribution in Greenleaf lexicon means the team that's responsible for selling that into the brick and mortar channels?
Yeah. Well, first of all, working with the team has been fantastic. Stephen and everyone that in that group, they've just been super, super responsive, and I can't say enough good things about them. And I frequently, particularly because I'm a first-time author, I had lots of questions. Probably because not only am I a first-time author, but also, I like things to work and I like them to be successful. And so, I had lots of questions, and they were, super responsive on all that. That they always seem to have answers for everything, and so that was great. And then, they've done a great job in sort of pitching me various programs. Whether it's like the very successful airport program we did, and pricing, and there's lots of questions and lots of sort of little levers, and so they've been a great partner through that. And I think also a message to authors and potential authors is that that as an author, you need to be involved. You need to help market that book, and you need to be available, and you need to work your network, and you need to work on it. And that was sort of one of the things I also didn't expect, is that it's one thing to write the book, and that's a lot of work and it's tough, but you need to work at marketing it also. Books don't market by themselves, and I think you guys have done a phenomenal job in everything. But as you can imagine, if you don't have any author engagement, it's much harder. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that's a point we just cannot stress enough, because you can't stress it enough, that all of the real breakout titles that I've seen are completely driven by the author's hustle. It is, I shouldn't say all, let's say 99%. I'm sure there's,
Sure.
one little, exception in there.
Pretty rare.
But that's why readers connect to content. They connect with the person, with the voice behind the expertise. And that's what makes it meaningful enough that they step out and actually buy the book and give you, I often make the comment that when we ask someone to read a book, we're not asking for $20, we're asking for 2 weeks. So that's a big commitment of time, and they have to have some level of trust already built with you as the author to give you that commitment.
I think that's absolutely right. And, let's face it, no matter what you're doing, you're competing for people's time these days, which is an increasingly short supply, because, there's Facebook, and there's, hundreds of channels on TV and everything else. So, you've got to have a great message out there, and you got to have a compelling, reason as to, why people should read your book, and you're the author is the best person to make that case, and it does work. That's what's kind of interesting, is that ultimately it does add up. Ultimately it does work. I know in my case, I've had this, a wonderful PR and marketing person also work with me, Sarah Wilson, and you guys, helped connect me to, and she's been absolutely sensational. And together we've worked, pretty tirelessly. She's been working tirelessly. I get tired of it. But, and ultimately it adds up and it works. So.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Now, of course, in Greenleaf's model, it's a little bit different than in a traditional model in that our authors can and hopefully do sell their books through direct sales channels because that's a much more profitable way for them to monetize the investment they made in their books. So are you doing that now? Do you sell your books through direct channels? And if you do, how do you go about that? Is it through speaking?
Yeah, I, did spend a fair amount of time looking into that, and particularly as it relates to speaking and sort of bundling, speaking engagements with book purchases and, or vice versa. And my conclusion is it's a great way to go, and a lot of people do it and very successfully. Personally, that's been a little bit limited for me, just because I think it, I've had a lot of success using the book for sort of other purposes. And I remember, Tanya, when I first walked into your office, one of the first questions in the first meeting that you guys asked me that I didn't necessarily expect, which is, why do you want to write the book? Mm-hmm. And I always thought it was, well, I don't know, I want to get it out there, but I'd also love to, it'd be great to, if it's a monetary event, make some money. And I think that you were quick to point out that there's a lot of ways to have a book be successful that may or may not directly tie into book sales or the monetization. And I know for me, while on the one hand, the sales of the book have been great, and it's it monetarily it's worked out. It by a long shot, I've gotten more value out of it, even by other things, which, for example, just, helping get the word out about, about the various companies I work with. It's introduced me to, so many people that I've followed up and had great relationships with and done business with. Oddly, it ended up taking me. It's sort of a long story, which I won't bother you with, but I ended up in Barcelona, for example, because people, folks over there read the book and were nice enough to bring me over there and speak to all the entrepreneur community in Barcelona, which I did. And, now I'm in the process actually of opening a whole office over there, and we're making quite an investment in Barcelona, and I expect that to work out really well. And so far it has. And so, that is a huge, just an example of sort of a side benefit, which is not really a side benefit for me. It's really the central benefit, but
Sure.
it's unexpected and not sort of the normal. How many books do you sell and how much money did you make from selling the books?
Yeah, I love that. And it really speaks to the reach that a book can have. That not too shabby, all the way to Barcelona.
All the way to Barcelona. Oh my God. And it was really, really interesting. And I've also been to Finland and just all around the country promoting the book. And as I say, part of the fun of that is just to meet other entrepreneurs and get the word out. And it's just really been great from that perspective.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned earlier that one piece of advice that you would give to authors is to expect to be involved in as far as promoting the book and getting the word out. And we talked about that connection being so important. But what's another piece of advice you might give to somebody who's on the front end, who's still, you came in here with your PowerPoint presentation and walked us through your content, which I remember very well. So you had sort of a you had a framework there that was basically the foundation for the book. But what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting that book creation process?
You mean like who maybe has an idea for a book or something like that?
Yeah, maybe they're kind of kicking it around. Maybe they're like you, where they had a good structure there, a framework, and weren't quite sure where to go with it.
Yeah. Well, look, I kind of stumbled into that because my venture partner, we were putting on a CEO conference, and he's like, well, you got to speak, which I didn't really want to do. I'm like, wow, well, what do I talk about? And so that's actually how this all started. But what got me to go from there to the book is that, I had this PowerPoint presentation, which was more or less what you saw. Mm-hmm. And, and people started saying, "Wow, that's really cool." And they, people were taking pictures of the slides, and they're like, "Can you send me the deck?" And da 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 da. And so I sort of stumbled into it, but it turns out that's a great way to sort of try out your idea to see if anyone cares. It's to somehow get it out there, maybe give a talk, maybe just socialize it with your friends, maybe maybe write a chapter or a deck and put it out, online or whatever it is. And you see people, and so for me, that was really, really an important part of sort of validating that anyone's going to care about, my crazy idea. And there was enough interest and reinforcement that it made writing a book. That's what, got me thinking, well, gee, maybe I should write a book, because actually I have a lot more to say about this than just was in the PowerPoint deck. And, you could see other, I know, for example, I know other authors that do the same type of thing. They'll give talks about a book that's going to come. And the ideas that they are going to put in there, and then they get feedback from the crowd, and they can figure out sort of what material is good, what material is not. So that kind of getting the idea out there and getting the feedback is super useful, I think. For example, I know Jeffrey Moore does that. He's just and Jeff is kind of an icon in the tech publishing business, and he gives lots of speeches, and he'll talk about things that perhaps he's thinking about in upcoming books. And I know that, for example, Nassim Taleb, the guy who a wonderful author who wrote Black Swan Theory and Anti-Fragile and been wildly successful, he's doing that now with his new book called Skin in the Game. He's literally just publishing parts of chapters. And he can, by doing that, sort of judge the feedback. And you're not buying the book, but you get.
It's like a serial.
Absolutely. And so it not only generates buzz and interest, but you get this wonderful feedback. So I think anything like that, where you can get the idea out there and see, kind of get an idea what people think, I think is a great way to go.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's like having your own little R&D department.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very, very good advice. All right. So a fun little question to close us out here. Howard, what's your favorite line from your book?
I think my favorite line from the book is actually one I mentioned earlier, which is the price of education goes up substantially after college. Just because it's so true.
As long as I'm not having to pay for that for my kids.
Exactly. So pay attention in college. Maybe.
Yeah, do they have scholarships for that?
No, it comes right out of right out of your pocketbook, right out of your hide. And there's another one, which is, and this is certainly applies to, the book publishing process, which is it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm always telling entrepreneurs, that startups, for example, take a very long time. They take much longer than people expect, and it's really hard. And it's an arduous journey that takes a real commitment. So if you start out and you say it's a marathon and this is going to take a long time and it's not a sprint, then you won't burn yourself out, and you'll sort of, like with writing this book, I tried to write every day for an hour or two. Kind of before my day job started, and I did that for a year and ended up with the book. And for me, that worked, and everyone will do it a little bit differently. But it is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a long-term commitment. So I think books and startups have a lot in common there.
Yeah, I like the analogy that you drew there, and I think that's right, because they're both a tremendous amount of hard work, and it's a collaborative team effort. And in the end, you may or may not be able to control the outcome, but the journey is probably worthwhile.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing is pick a great partner, and Greenleaf has been, a fantastic partner, and I'm grateful for everything you guys have done.
Oh, thank you, Howard. Really appreciate you saying that. Well, that does it for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time today.
All right, Janya, thanks a lot.
All right,
I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Howard Love for joining us today. And for additional resources and to learn more about Howard, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 13. And while you're there, don't forget to download the sample chapters from my book, Ideas, Influence, and Income, which goes into more detail about building your own author platform.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.